All right, before I get into what's beginning this weekend, I want to show you the three realities that we're all facing right now. This is the current situation that we're living in, and it will progress if Donald Trump loses in November at tremendous speed. Reality one, the United States currently has no president or a vice president. That's the reality, gang. Oh, they have offices in the White House. They even come up with family photos and, little place cards. And in terms of autonomous and independent leadership, that doesn't exist. Okay. I've showed you in previous shows on what's happening in all the main Western nations in the world. They are all marching to exactly the same drum. You look at some of the laws that have been passed in the last 4 years over in Germany and then in France and then here. They're almost word for word. How's that happening? We're all having the same problems. Waves and waves of massive illegal immigration. Fear campaigns that are used to weaponize the government onto their own citizens. The crackdown on free speech. And the forced merger of private business with the government through the radical green agenda. Okay. So how did a nation as defiant as the UK go from this? Whatever the cost may be, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. Wow. How did they get from that to this? 2 years ago, a UK Army veteran was arrested for posting a meme. Now, that meme didn't call for violence. He didn't yell fire in the middle of a crowded theater. But he was arrested because the meme was causing, quote, anxiety. How does that happen? How does a country get to that point? Well, we're not far behind them. As I show you later on the show, you might be surprised who our own puppet-in-chief is taking briefings from and who he's taking pointers from. Let me just tease it with, be careful what memes you post. We have no independent leadership in this country anymore. We have agents and representatives of the international order and machine. That's pretty much it. Well, then you also have the choice of Donald Trump. Robert F. Kennedy, but he's out. I'm also going to show you what the annual United Nations meeting this week reveals about our current reality. What is happening in the shadows is about to become business as usual and fully out in the open. Here's reality two. Zimbabwe. Inflation. You will own nothing and be happy in 6 years. Your wealth is already dissolving at a breakneck speed, but nobody's really telling you that. The national debt is set to blow past $36 trillion with zero plan to cut the spending. From 2025 through 2034, if everything remains as it is, the U.S. federal deficit will be over $16 trillion. Last week, for the first time in American history, the interest payments on the national debt topped $1 trillion. Do you remember 4 years ago, I did a show on this and everybody was saying it won't happen. And I said it's going to happen soon and you're not going to like it when it happens. See, all of this stuff, you haven't felt the real effects of. You know, the open borders? You're just starting to see the real effects in Aurora and Springfield, New York, with all of the death, murder, rape, all of that stuff. This is the beginning of it. All of the things that they did 3-4 years ago, it's all now picking up speed and it's all being seen now by you. But don't worry, it's all fine. It's all fine. We're lulled to sleep with reporting like this. The recent consumer price index shows, quote, inflation cools to 2.5%. Wow. Core prices, things like food, housing, energy, cars, things we actually buy and need, were a bit higher at 3.2. Now, what do you notice about these numbers? 2.5% inflation, 3.2% inflation. I mean, that seems manageable, right? Doesn't seem, it seems almost normal, doesn't it? We can deal with that. 2.5%, 3.2%, trust in the system and we'll all be okay. The government can keep spending and we can keep swiping the credit cards. Let me take you to the chalkboard for a second and show you something the government never wants you to see, and nobody in the mainstream media will ever explain it this way. Here's the inflation. We've all been hearing for 4 years now that there's nothing wrong with the national debt, the deficit, and inflation. It's fine. Bidenomics. The Fed has a plan. Everything is actually okay, and prices are coming down, or at least rising at a slower rate. But is that actually how you feel when you go to the grocery store? When you pay your energy bill? When you look at your new insurance bill? You fill up the gas tank. Do you feel like, it's fine, Bidenomics is working? Let me show you the reason for the disparity and also how the government is pulling off their little magic trick. Let me show you this part of the chalkboard. I'm going to start here. It reflects the Consumer Price Index from 23 to the end of 2024. This is the average cost of goods that we pay to support our family with things like clothes, cars, gas, energy bills, 3.2 to 2.5. You can see that there is a gradual increase from last year, but then boom, right at the tail end of 2024, like right now, during the election, isn't that weird? You can see that cooling comes down. Wow, it's working. Bidenomics is working. That's really not that big of a change. I mean, if this is where we were, how come? Why is it so hard to make ends meet? Why are credit cards all maxed to the limit? While we're arguing over the numbers like 2.5 and 3.2 month to month, let me show you the actual chart. See, that was just 1 year. Let me take you all the way back to 1950. This is 1950. Here's 2020. This is Trump. And this is the inflation that we had from Biden and Harris. The government wants you to focus on this, okay? But let me just show you. This right here, that is this. Okay? I don't know if you can zoom in enough, but that is the slide down. It's that big. Okay? This is where the discussion should be. This is where it should be, 20 to 2024. But they want you to focus on this big drop. No. This chasm from 20 to 24 is where the analysis should be. This is why we're all going bankrupt right now. And it's not a small percentage change from here to here. See, you remember when Trump was in office and our prices were here. And look at what has happened. Now, let me give you reality number 3. Zimbabwe. Again, Zimbabwe, but also China and the former Soviet Union. Zimbabwe, China, the Soviet Union all did exactly the same thing. They began seizing farmland, manipulating how food production operated, and killed massive amounts of people by doing it. Oh, and they also tanked their economies. Our international overlords, with their surrogates in the U.S. White House, are doing the same thing. We're right in the middle of the same thing. Have you ever heard of the 30 by 30 agenda? I know it's a conspiracy theory. It's not happening. Really? Well, the United Nations thinks it is. Every Western country is implementing it. Have you ever looked into the developments with the Sustains Act? The theft of American land, resources, and assets is now fully underway, and much of it progresses over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to take you there next. I want to talk to you, before we get into this, a little bit about lies. And I just want to take you through what we have seen, and we now can verify all of these things. Let's start with just COVID. First, the Democrats said, if Trump comes up with a cure for COVID, I won't take it. And it was celebrated. It was on news and everything else. They won't take it. Okay. I wouldn't have taken it either, because I didn't trust anybody doing that with mRNA. Turns out that was good thinking there. But first they said they wouldn't take it if Trump did. Then, after Big Pharma, remember, said we don't have anything in the pipeline until the election was over, the very next day, Big Pharma came out and said, there's a vaccine. And now it became the Biden vaccine. Now you had to take it. Anybody who didn't want to take it, like I wouldn't have taken it under Trump, I didn't want to take it under Biden, but now you're a grandma killer. Okay, you had to take it, and you had to keep getting the boosters. They're still schlepping this stuff, and we've seen exactly what that does. We've seen now the results. We have seen, remember when you couldn't talk about how come all these young people are dying with heart problems? That's new. No, it's not. It's always happened that way. It's always happening. This isn't what you're looking for. These are not the droids you're looking for. Are you kidding me? So we couldn't ask any questions. Okay. Then we couldn't even read the bills that were being passed. How much was the last one? $7 trillion, some crazy amount of money. And all Western countries are doing exactly the same thing. They're overspending. They are passing, in many cases, word for word, the same kind of bills, and all coming from the Economic Forum and the UN. All Western countries are doing the same thing that we're doing with immigration. We're just slightly behind them because we have a constitution. But did you know in the American Recovery Act, all of the money to pay for those hotels through NGOs, that was all taken care of. You notice nobody said who's paying for. We just assumed the city was paying for those hotels. No, the cities aren't. You are. In your taxpayer dollars, in the American Recovery Act, which was passed in 2021. What's happening right now is not a bug, it's a feature. Now we couldn't question Biden's senility. How dare you even ask that question? Now we can't ask Kamala, when did you know? How come you didn't tell us before? And we also can't question war. Have you seen what's happening with war? We are on the eve of war, and nobody's really talking about it. The elites are making the decisions on everything, and you can't question it. We need to turn this around, gang. We need to start asking questions, because this is my life. This is your life. This is the life of your children, your family. This is the life of all of the free people, all in the free world. And I don't trust anybody. In 1935, Ernest Hemingway said in an article that was published in Esquire magazine, and he said, if I might quote, "The first panacea of mismanaged nation is inflation of the currency. The second is war. Both will bring temporary prosperity. Both bring permanent ruin. Both are the refuge of political and economic opportunists." End quote. Inflation, a major war, and a pandemic. Wow, sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? And man, oh man, are the opportunists circling the waters. And one of the biggest wacko globalists on the planet is Bill Gates. Last week, he said that the world is currently facing a major war or another pandemic in less than 30 years. Yeah, 30 minutes probably closer. He said America failed to lead during COVID, but there were lessons learned. I wonder what those lessons are. That Americans can be ordered to stay indoors, to close their business down, to be injected with experimental vaccines, to shame others into silence, that they'll be silent when they're told you can't go to church anymore, that they will have to shut up, allow censorship, and believe only what the government tells them is true or not true. You mean, Bill, those lessons? Man, less than 30 years. If only the world would do something. I told you about this a few months ago, but it is here now. This weekend, leaders from every major country in the world are beginning to gather at the United Nations annual meeting in New York. This year's meeting has been named the Summit of the Future, and it includes an agenda item called Our Common Agenda. Now, this is the solution for everything Bill Gates was fanatically warning about last week. What if another war breaks out? Or the Russia-Ukraine war escalates? What happens if there's another pandemic? What happens if the global inflation crisis spirals further out of control? Well, our common agenda is here, which begins debate this week in New York City. It is the globalist plan of action. If it should pass, you are looking at a global government. This year's UN summit and the radical agenda are all about the same thing. And they state it on their website, quote, transforming global governance. That doesn't sound good. This document, our common agenda, isn't some random and boring policy paper or speech. This is a platform, and the only one voting for this are the UN members, not you. To be more specific, it's an emergency platform. Let me quote from it. The emergency platform would not be a standing body or entity, but a set of protocols that could be activated when needed. This new emergency platform could be activated for nearly anything, including climate events, economic, pandemic, wars, black swan type of surprises. National sovereignty doesn't seem to be a concern here, and this new platform could be enacted completely at the whim of the UN Secretary General. The UN's agenda over the next couple of weeks has gone through multiple revisions over the past few months, including this 17-page document that addresses technology, communications, and artificial intelligence specifically. I'll have this document up at glennbeck.com after the show. Read through it very carefully. This is a real threat. It is nothing short of a call for media companies to censor wrongthink and for AI to progress according to their agenda. And it is all cloaked in a bunch of human rights jargon, but it is really just a sales pitch to direct speech and technology advancement guided by the globalists for the next 6 years. Censorship is about to become a global government mandate. That much we know, and much of the Western world is already on board. Earlier in the show, I showed you some of the things the UK was doing. Want to take a guess at which Western government is looking to copy what they're doing? Documents were leaked last week that show the Biden administration was getting detailed presentations from the UK government on how to censor their own people. A meeting was attended by the Biden White House, the National Security Council, and the Office of Director of National Intelligence, the CIA, FBI, the Department of State, Treasury, Defense, Homeland Security, HHS, USAID, and multiple high-ranking officers in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. It seems kind of like an important meeting, one we should have heard about, and it seems like they're serious. The UN's will is getting done regardless of how the vote goes in the next couple of weeks. It is already happening, and our own government is learning how. But it goes much further. The UN has proposed something called the 30 by 30 agenda. You really need to read up. We are 6 years away from this. On this document as well, in essence, the globalists of the world have a plan to seize 30% of all land on planet Earth and all water. The words private property will not matter. They do not matter to these people. But as ludicrous as that sounds, you need to learn about this because it is spreading everywhere. The European Union is implementing it as we speak. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is happening now. California, by the way, is using the exact same language. And Joe Biden's first salvo of executive orders mentions conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. Now, you might be wondering, what's with the arbitrary number of 30%? How would they know that's beneficial to the planet? Well, this isn't about conservation. It's about taking taking. Now the question is, how do you do that in the United States? Well, you do it through something called the Sustains Act, which was signed into law as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act last year. You know, that omnibus that we always have to rush through? It allows the government to receive private funds to advance conservation programs. Kind of sounds like the seizing of American assets, even privately owned, just became one of the biggest public-private partnerships in human history. The Sustains Act looks to assign environmental services that are provided on privately owned land. Now, what are environmental services? Well, they could assign whatever they want from your land. Does your property contribute to pollination? Photosynthesis. Does your property have a lot of trees so it affects the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, other health type benefits? It's all being monetized through a relationship between private investors like Bill Gates and the government. And it all occurs without the landowner. This is already U.S. law. This is the seizing of America's real assets without the consent of the people that actually own the land. And it's all being done in line with the goals of the international organization like the United Nations 30 by 30.